All right. Hello, everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about career crises and transitions and going over three different models. Try to stay brief of how to help clients make sense of career crises and transitions. And that can apply to the clinical mental health, school counseling, career counseling settings, just clients who are having career concerns. All right, so the first model that I wanted to talk about is Schlossberg. It has this transition theory model, and it talks about the different types of transitions. So there's unanticipated, anticipated, and non-events. So anticipated transitions are just as they sound. So there are these transitions that we're able to plan for. We're seeing them looming in the future, maybe a long way in the future, maybe in the near future. Uh, But even though there's this, I think for the most part, anticipated transitions are going to be transitions, not crises, but they can have this element of crisis as well. So, for example, I had a private practice career counseling client who was basically throughout years was working in kind of a dead end job for him, something that he didn't want to be working in as a sales type position that wasn't fulfilling, wasn't where he wanted to be with his life and his career. So it was an anticipated end that he'd be coming to this conclusion of this, but it was almost like a crisis as well that he was feeling trapped in the career path because he had started to get secure pay and just kind of a safe and kind of secure setting. So like throughout time, it was growing more and more unfulfilling, more unsatisfying, and more of a feeling of being trapped. So that's where like the crisis type feelings were there. That's what led him to the career counseling is he was tired. He was exhausted of being in this unfulfilling space. So that's an example of how there can be this slow buildup of a crisis as well. It's not always just these kind of immediate, kind of acute type reactions and settings. So an example of unanticipated transitions or crises, this could be maybe an unexpected job loss. Maybe someone's fired or let go. Maybe it's the death of a loved one. Uh, Unanticipated changes could be maybe failing a class that's impacting the career aspiration, the academic journey. So unanticipated changes are likely to be more of like a crisis type response because they're unexpected. They're unexpected. They're these uh, you can't plan for them. So the emotional, you know, I guess repercussions of those unanticipated transitions can be stronger. Uh, One example of this is there's a student who came in who there's I guess there's a flavor of both anticipated and unanticipated transitions in this example. But so it was her first semester of college, freshman year. And I think just the weight of the reality of college had finally settled in. The newness, like this honeymoon phase of just being a college student, had worn off for her, and is like just several weeks into the semester. And I think just the weight of, okay, like before when I was in high school and planning for college is like, oh, eventually I'm going to make these choices. I'm going to make these choices. Like there's a lot of family influence of pursuing the education field. So just kind of thinking like, yeah, later on I'll do that. But then it's like she was right there in the thick of it and starting to feel the reality of what that pathway looked like. So she would come in just in tears usually, or often kind of get to this place of tears of just feeling this emotional weight and this expectation weight of from family to follow in the education pathway. And it was just kind of weighing on her a lot. So a lot of our work was just kind of helping her navigate that unanticipated kind of crushing weight of this responsibility of self-direction, and then kind of untangling or acknowledging the influence from family in a new way and kind of renegotiating that relationship in some ways was important. So that transition was difficult for her, but I think meaningful and important for her growth. The last, I guess, going back to the model of the last type of transition or crisis is due to non-events. This one's really interesting. It's almost like if an anticipated transition never happens, it's a non-event. So maybe that is the expectation of graduation, but then it never happens. It could be the expectation of a promotion that the person's been working for a long time, but then it never happens. It never materializes. Uh, So these non-events can be really shaking as well. It's like I had this vision of what I wanted my life to look like, and it's not happening. So this can lead to obviously a lot of emotional reactions, but then also just a lot of confusion of like, so what do I do now? What do I make of my life now that the non-event occurred? Like I'm not moving forward how I expected. Uh, so Schlossberg also talks about and gives this idea of the four S's. So when clients are navigating, or people are in general are navigating these transitions or crises, there's these four S's to think about. So the first one is the situation. And it's kind of what we've been already talking about. What's the type of the transition? Is it anticipated, unanticipated, a non-event? Was it expected, hoped for, uh, etc.? So we can kind of get the context of the details of how they were kind of making sense and how they currently are making sense of the transition or the crisis. The number two is the second S is self. So what is the individual's sense of self? Who are they? What are their demographic characteristics? What are their sense of personal strengths and patterns, weaknesses? What's their sense of like their self-concept of how they interpret who they are? So obviously navigating transitions and crises, it's really important to kind of explore this sense of self of like who they are and their sense of you know strength to move through it, as well as the weaknesses of that they when they feel they can't. Then the third S is support. So what network of support does the person have? Maybe there's family, friends, teachers, professors, counselors, coaches, whatever. Uh, who who and what do these networks of support look like? Maybe they're sufficient, maybe they're insufficient, that they don't feel support from the close people in their life. So making sense of that, those support systems is an important process as well. The fourth S stands for strategies. So what are ways that the person copes with transitions? How do they cope? What are those strategies? And I think it can be important to think about what are the previous strategies that worked? Could those be applied in the present? But also sometimes the present is unique. And the previous ways, the previous strategies that we've built to navigate transitions and make decisions and kind of cope with crises, it's no longer relevant. It doesn't make sense anymore. So sometimes it's this kind of hard growth and learning process of learning like, okay, now that I'm facing something totally unique to who I am, how do I navigate this? What strategies do I need to learn so I can navigate it? So those are the four S's to kind of navigate with those transitions. So the second model that I want to talk about is kind of a quick one, but it's more, I don't even know if it's a model, it's more just like a position of how to view a position from which to view career. Uh, So the idea is the Protean career. So there's a Greek god of the sea who was able to change shape. So Proteus. And so why it was applied to career is some people are kind of basically writing about how it's important to be flexible, adaptable, and versatile in career during career transitions and just during the career lifespan in general. And it's not like you need to be adaptable and versatile, like you put on a fake mask or you're just playing a facade. But it's like you have a sense of grounding of who you are, but then you can adapt and play it out in different ways. So in the Scharf text, the Scharf 2013 text, it talks about on page 268, where I'm getting the information for these videos from. It talks about, here's a quote: individuals who have a protean attitude about their career are self-directed and make choices based on their personal values. So I think that's the grounding, their sense of like, I know what my values are. I know what's most important to me. And while the surface of my life might be changing, it might be transitioning in ways that I can't anticipate, that I can't control. I might be going through crises, but I can kind of go back to my sense of values and find direction from those values. So maybe I need to change the surface of my life pretty significantly. Like I'm no longer in a career path at all, or I get fired, but I need to still live out my values in a new career path in a new way. Uh, so once again, that flexibility, adaptability, and versatility is essential, but it's not just like groundless flexibility. Okay, the last model that I want to go over before I wrap up is the Hobson and Adams model. So this is a model of adult transitions. I'm going to share my screen to give a little visual of this model. All right. So for those who are taking my class, this is in the module 5 overview. So the model though is basically these 7 stages. And just got to open up some notes real quick. All right, so these 7 stages. The first starts with immobilization. So maybe there's a career crisis where, uh, so I guess I'll just start with an example. There was a student who I worked with in academic counseling who had this high sense of like the family culture was that we achieve academically, particularly in the math, like in science area, the STEM field. And so she was not doing well in the math and science area. So there is this sense of like, I'm failing, but it wasn't just like I'm failing classes. It was like, I'm failing and I am failing my family. I'm failing our legacy. So this led to this sense of like immobilization. So she was just kind of stuck, immobilized by this failure, this fear of failure. She was actually doing okay in some of the classes, but she was miserable and she never studied and therefore she didn't do well. And then she felt bad about herself for not doing well. So there's this kind of this vicious cycle of like, I don't want to do this, but I feel I should, and I feel like I should be good at it and I'm not. So for her, it led to this feeling of despair. But for other people, it could be like the sense of like, oh, I'm free. Maybe they're just fired from a job and it's like, okay, I'm immobilized. I don't know what to do next, but I'm like feeling a sense of relief. So that's stage one. Stage two is this area of like minimizing. So it might be like, okay, so now that's, I guess the example of the person fired from their job, it could be like, okay, minimizing it. Oh, it's not so bad. Oh, it'll be okay. Like it was meant to be, like whatever it is. But then it goes to this area of self-doubt, to where it's like, I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be able to navigate this transition right. And I think that's kind of what that example of the academic counseling student was stuck in, that anxiety and that fear of failure, was this self-doubt, like I can't do it. I'm not good enough. I'm not doing things right. I'm not living up to my family legacy. And that family cultural piece was really significant there. And I think that's why there's a lot of this, the mood on this continuum here was going down, is like, I'm not living up to that. So after someone's like kind of going through this period of self-doubt, they get to this place of letting go. And I think a big piece of letting go is acceptance, accepting that like, okay, this pathway in life that I was pursuing that's now ended, that's I'm transitioning away from, I'm accepting that it's done. I'm accepting that I'm leaving that fork in the road and I'm choosing a different road, or I'm being forced to choose a different road. So one example of this, another student that I was working with was like dead set on nursing. It was like, I must pursue the nursing field and nothing is going to stop me, even hating the classes and never wanting to study. Similar example there. So she just was not doing well in the classes, didn't like them, didn't want to study, but didn't have the motivation, but was just like really set on nursing still. But it was a very competitive program at the University of Wyoming. Uh, but I think really what was going on is she came from a setting where she was in the foster care system and had gone through some pretty significant like attachment traumas, and so it's hard for her to let go of security. And I think you can envision why, as someone who's just lost a lot in relationship ways from really significant caregivers early on. It's There's this hard ability to let go of something that was a source of security for her. Her career path was this almost like this pseudo security, but she eventually got to this place of like being open to letting go, because it was like, okay, this maybe I know that I want to help people, but now I'm learning that maybe I can help in a new way. So she started to, I guess this leads to the next stage, is testing out. She started to test out new pathways. And one that we came up with that might be a good fit was social work. Kind of exploring her values and how she wanted to help people, is like, okay, that could be a helpful way. And it makes sense that like in the foster care system, like she could be play a significant role in the foster care system as a social worker. So she started to test out. I think she just like took 1 or 2 classes in that area one semester just to see if it was a good fit. And she loved it. It was a really good fit. And that led to the next stage of searching for meaning. So for her, it was like a big source of meaning to be a social worker, because it was almost like I can be the person that I never had as someone in the foster care system when I was my younger self. So I think that career path was a source of income, was a source of security, but it was also a source of meaning. And then that led to the last stage of internalization. I want to pull up the Scharf text on here to address this one because I feel like Scharf addresses it well. So it's on page 275. So people who get to this internalization place or stage of transition, Scharf talks about it that internalization implies a change in values and lifestyle. The individual may have developed new coping skills and has grown emotionally, spiritually, or cognitively, and I would say and or cognitively as a result of going through a difficult crisis. And I'd also add difficult transition. So I think there's this, you can see this growth emotionally, spiritually, and or cognitively that they've kind of grown and become something through this transition and this crisis. And I think that's the holistic mental health connection with career, is that career is often this very personal journey, like process that clients are going through. And as they navigate it, there's also a lot of personal growth and personal meaning that's found in it. Not for every single client to various levels, but for some, it's going to be really important. Uh, I'll stop sharing there. So those are just a few thoughts on a few different models of how to navigate career transitions, that they're not easy. Sometimes they're expected, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're not events. And then there's various ways for us as helpers to be able to make sense of these transitions for ourselves and then be able to have a kind of like a framework from which to support clients. So that's kind of part of the key goal with these models. So if there are any questions or comments, happy to chat about those. Happy to see those. But I'll pause at this point and share some more videos in the future.